Ceann Comhairle, the question I want to start with today is, what has Fianna Fáil got against home ownership? Every time that party has been in government in recent times, house prices have risen and home ownership has fallen and fallen dramatically. The last time Micheál Martin was in the Cabinet, the tail end of that period, the current minister was a new backbencher. Not only did house prices rise to their highest point in the history of the state, but home ownership fell at a more dramatic pace than we have seen before or since. And now, back in government, Fianna Fáil back in charge of housing, and we're back to the bad old days. According to the latest figures from the CSO, in a month or two, we will hit and pass the Celtic Tiger peak for house prices. And again, thanks to Fianna Fáil, home ownership is a distant reality for far too many people. And the reason why, of course, is the policies that Minister Bryan has introduced. And let's look at some of them before I talk to our motion. One of his first acts as Minister for Housing was to expand the highly controversial so-called Help to Buy scheme. 60% of the people who benefited from that didn't need it. They had deposits and mortgages, according to an independent Oireachtas report. And large numbers of organisations and independent economists said it would push up house prices. Next, we had the shared equity loan scheme. Now it's been mired in controversy for almost 2 years because of the strong opposition from NESC, ESRI, the Central Bank, even the IMF last week, criticising the potential risk of the scheme. And what will it do? Again, push up house prices. And then today, not being satisfied with all of that, Minister O'Brien introduces what has to be the most crazy housing scheme that I've heard from any government in recent years. He's going to give large private developers subsidies of up to 120,000 in Dublin, up to 144,000 outside of Dublin, with no reduction in price for the purchaser and no affordability dividend. A chronic waste of taxpayers' money at best, locking in unaffordable excessive prices for apartments and at best driving them even further upwards. These are the reasons why the latest CSO figures show house prices rising by 15% across the state, 27% in border areas, median house price across the state 282,000. But in the minister's own constituency, the median new house price is almost €500,000. That is what you get when Fianna Fáil are in government. Now, the Minister, I'm sure, will claim that his affordable housing fund, funding for local authorities to deliver genuine affordable homes, is another measure to tackle the problems that we're raising tonight. But as the figures he gave me by way of parliamentary question last week, which we published this week, show, that stands in stark contrast to the hundreds of millions Fianna Fáil give to large developers. On average, we'll get 1,500 units a year through that fund, although it'll be 2 or 3 years before we get there. And the annual targets for affordable purchase homes through this scheme are appallingly low, only 400 in Dublin City, only less than 200 in the Minister's own constituency, 30 to 45 a year in the commuter belt, some cities as low as 15. Any wonder people can't put an affordable roof over their head. But there is a better way. And the motion we've outlined tonight, building on the costed alternative proposals in our alternative budget, show how you can do it. Stop giving huge gifts to large developers and speculators and invest all of that money in the direct delivery of large volumes of genuinely affordable homes to purchase through local authorities, approved housing bodies, co-op like O'Coulon and community housing trusts. We estimate that you need at least 4,000 affordable purchase homes a year, genuinely affordable purchase homes built on public land. And as the Minister knows, our innovative leasehold proposal would ensure not only are they genuinely affordable, but you would build up year on year a growing number of privately owned, privately tradable, but permanently affordable homes, not just for the first purchaser, but for every purchaser into the future. We also think you should scrap all of these crazy schemes that you claim assist people in buying homes, when in fact there's no entry-level criteria. People get access to public money who don't need it, and they drive up public homes. And all of that money could be used to deliver the 4,000 genuinely affordable homes a year that we are calling for. We also think every single local authority should be able to apply to the scheme. The affordability test through the Housing Needs Demand Assessment was badly designed, and the Minister has made some concessions in that regard. But the key here is this. The one thing government can control is the amount of its investment on its land to develop genuinely affordable homes. You are not doing that. It's not in your plan. And until you reverse that, this affordable housing crisis is going to get worse. And on that basis, I commend the motion to the House.
Minister, we're in the chamber here again, once again, debating affordable housing and the desperate need to deliver affordable housing. Cork City meet their targets every year and have for years. In actual fact, a lot of years they exceed them. Right now, Cork City Council are given the target of 278 affordable houses to deliver, and they're actually in the pipeline to be delivered. But the problem here is the targets are too small and not ambitious enough. If we take my colleague Owen O'Brien, Deputy O'Brien's targets of 4,000 a year, that would equate to 400 a year for Cork City Council, which is 10% of the whole social housing stock in Cork, which would turn out at 1,600. So the difference between your plan of 278 and our plan of 1,600, and that's the fundamental difference. You're not ambitious enough. You don't understand what's needed, what we need to deliver. And your figures are just a drop in the ocean. My fear is that this government is so out of touch with and your priorities are so misled that the housing crisis will continue to get worse. And Minister, in my maiden speech in 2009, I said in Cork City Council we had a housing crisis. Here we are now, 13 years later, and it's worse now than it ever was, and that's under your watch and Fine Gael's watch who delivered it. Instead of falsely trying to accuse Sinn Féin of objecting to housing, Minister, which you do virtually every opportunity you get, right? You'd be better off with looking at understanding why a person appointed to Board Penala continued to vote in housing developments, even though after you appointed a senior counsel to investigate serious allegations in relation to conflicts of interest in Board Penala. Why are certain people in high positions, people who are friends with government ministers, who earn more on the Taoiseach, feel they're above the law and above this government? The problem here is priorities are all wrong. Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael prioritise speculators, developers, where Sinn Féin prioritise ordinary people and the delivery of affordable housing. My colleague Owen O'Brien is bringing forward solutions. It's all about solutions. But Minister, when it comes to it, you're all about politics and looking after the big people, the rich people, the developers, and that's the fundamental difference. And that's why this makes, if we have put in this motion here today, deliver this, Owen O'Brien will make a real difference to ordinary people's lives.
People my age feel like they have literally no chance. No chance when they look into their future at ever having home ownership. And as my colleagues have said, that is under your watch. I have the common theme with my friends, with co-workers that I've had in the past, is that they work day in, day out, and nothing gets easier. They feel they're completely locked out of home ownership. And what we're seeing at the moment is that the increase in the cost of living is simply squeezing people more and more in terms of their ability to rent and indeed to afford housing. And what we know is that at this time of the evening, people my age will be going home after a long, hard day's work, commuting long distances, and probably haven't had quite a tough day of work. And where are they going home to? They're going home to overcrowded, cramped situations. They're going into back to their parents' box rooms, trying to scrimp and save as much as they can so that they can at some point be able to own their own home. And what, Minister, are you saying to those people in Galway City? What are you saying to those people in Galway County? Well, what you're saying, Minister, is that in Galway City you'll deliver 30 affordable homes a year. In Galway County you'll deliver 45 affordable homes a year. That's nothing for the people that are waiting, the people who have been trying year in, year out to save the money to be able to get their mortgage. That does nothing for them. And one thing that I've seen from government parties, spokespeople and elected reps across Galway, time in and time out, telling us that There's a brilliant development coming on board for affordable housing in Galway City, and week after week I get people locally contacting me, asking me when will these affordable homes be delivered for us so that we can actually maybe have a chance to own our own home. Well, only this week, Minister, I found out that they won't be available until 2024. Minister, that's 2 years away. See, for people who can't afford their rents, for people who've had to move in with their parents, with their grandparents, that's simply not good enough. And Minister, we know what is needed. We know that supply is needed. But when we see supply in Galway, what we see is build to rent that's completely unaffordable for people who are working working day in, day out. What we need is 4,000 homes being delivered, as my colleague Owen O'Brien has said. We need them at affordable prices.
Tréstúlasin an mulla ó an teacht O'Brien agus is léir goil na sprucanna atá ag an rainn níl siad dónach golóir agus ní chuirigh siad os ar gcóir golóir tuí in acmhainthe agus tá an géircéim tuíochta ag gairí níos measa ag golóir slite go mórmhór le raint míosta beag an nós. I think it's been said in some of the previous speeches, but when you talk to young people, when I talk to them in my constituency in Cork, the attitude is like, what are we supposed to do? What chance have we got? We're going out, we're getting a job, sometimes well-paid jobs, and it's just not possible. It's just not possible to afford a home. They can't afford to rent, they can't afford to buy, they very definitely cannot afford to do both. And home ownership is absolutely out of reach, and for many of them, they don't qualify for social housing. And more, the future to them seems uncertain, it seems insecure, it seems impossible to plan for family, for work, for anything like that, because they don't have any confidence of having a secure home, and that they feel that their future is being taken away from them. And that is the attitude that I encounter on the ground, and things are in many respects getting worse. House prices have increased by 30% since 2016, rents have increased by 44%. Cork City is the third highest rents in the state, averaging over 1,300 rising, though I would say a lot of people would say that actually isn't too bad, given some of the examples that you would see around the city, 1,400, 500, much more than that for relatively modest homes. The government haven't shown adequate ambition to make housing affordable. They're failing ordinary workers and families in Cork and across the state. And these targets, they're not anywhere near enough in terms of what's needed in terms of affordable housing. 76 affordable homes in the city a year, 38 in the county. The population of the county council is about 440,000. Are we expecting the county to do the miracle of the loaves and fishes with 38 houses? It's simply not going to be anywhere near enough to meet the amount of people that are being knocked off of the housing list, not qualifying, or not being able to get an affordable mortgage. It's not going to go anywhere near far enough, and those young people are going to fear for their future.
Cancorla, not a single affordable house will be provided over the next 4 years in either counties Monaghan or Cavan that I represent. Now, that's not speculation or a guess on my part. That is actually the target number of affordable houses that the government have set. I suppose some might say, well, finally, there's a housing target that the government will meet. But to me, I think that is a scandalous statement of fact. Now, the Minister's response or his justification will essentially be that house prices aren't expensive enough in those regions to warrant being considered under the affordable housing scheme, despite the fact that house prices in the border region increased by almost 25% last year, 17% the year before. I'd like to know precisely how high the prices have to get before affordable houses will be provided, because the truth is that home ownership is now already beyond the reach of most young workers and families, and at the same time rents are completely out of control. So I want government to accept that they are either incapable of recognising the scale of the challenge or admit that they're not serious about meeting it. Because it's one or the other, Minister. We cannot say to, as you do, Minister, in this House from time to time, that you're serious about home ownership, that you're serious about delivering houses, and have a situation where a family, a couple with 4 children, earning €27,000, can't get on the social housing list in my county, can't pay the rent and will never be in a position to buy their own home, and that your government will provide nothing in terms of affordable housing option to them. So this is time to get real. Either we accept that Eoin Ó Broin's policies are there, ready to be implemented and will actually make a difference, or we carry on as before with one false promise after another, one false stone after another, because the truth has now been very evident. This government, the parties that make up this government, simply do not have the capacity to address the housing needs of our people.
Minister, last month myself and my colleague Dr. Eoin Ó Broin met with the officials from the Housing Department at Kildare County Council. They were diplomatic in their answers, but it is clear that they are working with one hand tied behind their back. Finance decisions from the department are taking too long. Approved housing bodies are hamstrung. While many people may be critical of Kildare County Council, I know from first-hand experience that they are seriously understaffed and under-resourced. It has taken up to 3 months to get a reply to a basic representation sent to Kildare County Council, and every housing reply says that there are 6,600 people on the housing list. The wait time is 10 to 12 years. 10 to 12 years, Minister. And they must find their own HAP property. You would need the miracle, and Deputy O'Leary spoke about this, of the loaves and fishes to see a HAPs as a solution. There are just 28 rental properties available in the whole county today. Just one of those is within the HAP limits. There are only 3 properties under €1,000 a month. It is clear that the government's private market approach is not working, and there are lots of people suffering because of it. I have a list of 13 families, 9 couples and 11 single people whose landlords have given them notice to quit because they are selling the property. And the current rules do not allow the council to buy property with the tenant in situ. I have couples in emergency accommodation who are being accommodated separately. The nuclear family used to be held in high regard. It doesn't seem like that anymore. I've been helping a mother who's raising 4 children alone since her husband left. This week she was hard to explain to 4 young children that the sign that the landlord has put up outside her home meant that they would have to move. She is facing emergency accommodation if the council can actually find some, and the difficulty of getting kids to school in another town while trying to hold down her part-time job. And all these are victims of poor government policy. The present government's policies are too investor and developer orientated. My colleague Eoin Ó Broin, when he is Housing Minister, will change this. We saw with the recent affordable housing targets that this government lacks the will and ambition to address the housing crisis that they have created. And you have created this. They are proposing to build just 45 affordable houses in Kildare, 45, per year over the next 5 years. This is barely a drop in the ocean of what is needed. You're out of touch, government, and you're out of time.
Thanks, Concord, and welcome the opportunity to speak on this motion. It's very important what we're putting forward here this evening as part of our strategy to tackle the housing crisis by significantly increasing the number and delivery of affordable homes to buy. And it's important that we have a big element of home purchase in our housing programmes. This would make a massive difference to people across the country, and especially in Laois Offaly, where the housing crisis is having a devastating effect on the lives of too many people. We have thousands of people trapped in private rental accommodation where rents are out of control. In Laois, 3-bedroomed house starts at €1,058 per month, in Offaly €1,040, and the common asking price now is between €1,200 and €1,400 a month for a house to rent. Sky high, too high. Many workers and families have incomes that are too high for the council's social housing waiting list, but too low to get approved for a mortgage from the bank. Workers on low and middle incomes, and this is the problem, workers on low and middle incomes are locked out of home ownership. They earn too much for the council and social housing list, but they're trapped, and yet they're paying sky-high rents, which are actually higher than what a mortgage would cost. I've had cases where people are paying €1,200 and €1,300 and they can get a mortgage. If they could get a mortgage to buy the same size house, they'd be paying €800 a month. It's crazy stuff. In Laois Offaly, a couple earning over, wait for it, €504 a week are over the income threshold for council and social housing, while a couple with 2 children are over the limit if they earn just €528. What are they supposed to do? Now, I raised this with you and you sent a reply to me there 2 weeks ago about this. and I keep getting the same replies that the officials are looking at it. You need to sort that. We need to do more to help these workers. We need to deliver affordable homes to purchase. Figures provided to us, to Deputy O'Brien, in the last couple of weeks here, I have them here in front of me, they revealed that the government target under the Affordable Housing Fund scheme from 2022 to 2026 for all of Laois is an average of 9 houses per year, 38 in total, and not one single house for Offaly. Totally unacceptable. We're calling on the government to revise the affordable home targets agreed with local authorities and deliver an average of at least 4,000 affordable purchase homes a year across the state over the next 4 years. More importantly, we need to deliver affordable homes that can be sold at prices that working people can afford. The housing crisis is devastating the lives of workers across the country and families, and the government and every one of us must do more to ensure people can buy a genuinely affordable home, Minister.
Thank you, Deputy Stanley. Minister, please.
Good Ceann Comhairle, and I move the counter motion on behalf of the government. I thank the deputy opposite for tabling the motion to give us the opportunity to have a debate on home ownership and indeed on affordable housing, and to interrogate some of the things that everyone has been said. I welcome that, because I think one thing that's recognised and should be recognised is that yes, there is absolutely a difficulty with affordability, and that's the whole thrust of Housing for All, is to tackle that, and I'll expand on that shortly at Ceann Comhairle as well. There's a fundamental difficulty with supply, and there has been. I don't think we can ignore that. We can't ignore the last 2 years, or indeed the last 10 years of undersupply, and that's why it's crucially important that government brought forward the Housing for All plan, which is the first plan that any government have brought forward that's funded on a multi-annual basis to the tune of €4 billion. To deliver more social homes than ever before, new build, 90,000 between now and 2030, 9,000 new build homes this year, 54,000 affordable homes, and between now and 2026, 29,000 of those. And I'll deal with the matters within your motion and some of the statements that you've said. Cost rental for the first time ever. And yes, we need private homes too. So we need 300,000 new homes between now and 2030 to address the undersupply in housing. Now, we've passed the Affordable Housing Act, which I welcomed the support of actually most deputies within this House, with the exception of, I think, around 8 at that stage, because it was recognised, I assume, by the fact that members opposite supported it, that they support the thrust of the legislation. Let's deal firstly with the analysis that has been made based on a response to a parliamentary question. There's been a deliberate misrepresentation, actually, of the affordable housing targets that have been set. Because the affordable housing targets that you've referred to, which in total between now and 2026 are local authority delivered affordable homes, 7,550 across the 31 local authorities. But what it does say in the response to Oireachtas O'Brien, which you didn't refer to, that is, in addition to this targeted local authority delivery, affordable purchase and cost rental homes will also be made available by approved housing bodies. They deliver real homes too, I think you know that, by the Land Development Agency in these local authority areas as part of the overall affordable housing delivery commitment under Housing for All. And in addition to that will be the affordable homes delivered under the First Home Shared Equity Scheme, which will launch and be available to people from the 1st of July this year. So what is each member of the Sinn Féin party who has decided to come up and just look at one aspect of that delivery, doesn't include Part 5 delivery either. I might add, and you know that too, but it doesn't actually suit the narrative, and that's okay. So I think we need to get back to a bit of reality here. I think we also need to get back to some truth and be honest with people too. Yes, there is an issue with affordability. I am acutely aware of that. And I believe in home ownership, and I believe in giving people a start so they can own their own homes. Now, when I look at the Sinn Féin plan, I use that word loosely, which is a 16-page document, 8 pages of which are nice pictures like that of cups of coffee. And I looked through what Sinn Féin have looked for. Well, this is actually your policies. So the largest public house building programme in the history of the state. We're actually doing it. How were you saying you're going to do it? You're going to do it by bringing total capital spend to €2.8 billion per year. We're putting €4 billion per year. 1.2 billion more than Sinn Féin. Now let's talk about affordability. Affordable Housing Act's in place. We've published the affordable purchase regulations. It's open. There will be people in affordable purchase homes this year. You've neglected to mention Project Hussey as well and the delivery through the LDA. We'll have hundreds of affordable purchase homes this year and hundreds more cost rental. Well, what's the Sinn Féin affordable purchase scheme? I think people need to know this. Eligibility for affordable housing would be set at a gross income of £55,000 for a single person and £85,000 for a couple. Now, people who are earning, take your guard and your nurse, on €44,000 per year, on the median of their grades, will not be eligible for affordable housing through your housing plan. Sorry, you wrote this, Owen, or maybe you didn't, but this is your policy. Won't actually be eligible. Won't be. We're not going to do this again, are we, Count Corla, as he behaved last week, just consistently interrupting. So look, your plan is there as well, and then we does not address also any capacity issues. So we have to be realistic on what can be delivered, and that's important. And it's important you're open and honest and realistic with people. So what we have detailed for each local authority and agreed with each of them is their direct delivery. And that does not include LDA delivery, it does not include Part 5 delivery, it does not include first home shared equity delivery. So what have we targeted between now, and what are the real targets, not the targets that have come out of the mouths of Sinn Féin here today? What are the real targets that we have set between this and then? 29,000 affordable homes between now and 2026. And this is happening already. And how do we do that? We need to increase supply. And yes, it is a problem, Deputy Gould, when people continually object to housing. That's just a reality. But let's see what's actually really happening out there. So let's look at the figures with regards to increase in housing supply. First quarter of this year, 5,669 new homes completed. Commencement notices, 34,846 commencement notices to February this year. The single biggest commencement notice in the 12-month period since figures were collated back in 2011, and the same with Q1. Now, what we need to do is to make sure that there are homes for people to purchase. So why are we doing that? We're doing it through the Affordable Housing Fund, which, by the way, is open to every local authority. There's 18 local authorities in the plan right now. We've addressed it last week as well, where we've other schemes coming in from other local authorities. And what have I done with the with the Affordable Housing Fund? We've raised the subvention to 100,000 to address affordability issues in the areas in which it's most acute, particularly in our cities, but not exclusively so. And that has been done already. We've actually, under the Affordable Housing Fund, already approved over 1,731 new homes have been approved under that fund already. You do not turn this around overnight. The Housing for All plan was launched last September, and it is taking root already. But what people deserve, and they deserve honesty, and they deserve a real plan that is going to work and that is actually taking effect. So coming here and quoting figures that are half of what, actually one quarter of what you know anyway, because you deliberately left out the other part of the answer within the parliamentary question. Now again, that might actually suit a narrative, and that is fine. And I think in fairness, people will look through that. But let's again look at what the home ownership means to Sinn Féin. I've been very clear that I believe in home ownership, and I believe people should get a start. But Sinn Féin's affordable housing would deliver leasehold homes, apparently leasehold. So you're not going to own the home at the end of it, and you're going to restrict actually who can buy that home, who you can sell it to. So what it is conditional home ownership. And yes, we do need to make sure that across the board, that measures taken by government activate supply too. And that is the reason why the Croí Cónaithe Cities Fund was launched today, because believe it or not, colleagues, there are thousands of planning permissions, particularly in our cities, where we need compact urban growth, where we need to develop within our cities, brownfield sites that you say you want to develop, well, you need a plan to do so. And we're brave enough to put that forward and deliver it. But see, and now, Deputy Carthy, I don't think you were here last week for the debate on rent, but in fairness, well, you're carried on as your colleagues did last week by just continually interrupting me. Now, your own part,
Please.
I respect this chamber and always have. You may not, and that's fine. What I would say to you is, your own party spokesperson in an article very recently talked about negotiating with developers and flipping sites, flipping developments, but he's going to put a strict price control, and then he's going to move people out of commercial construction. I don't know, with some type of magic wand that Deputy O'Brien would have, to actually move them out and say, no, don't build those hospitals, don't build those schools, build these homes. You don't do it that way. You've got to build, you've got to build capacity. And that's why the Housing for All plan has brought back the capacity of the construction sector to pre-pandemic levels and will create at least 29,000 new jobs. 9,000 new apprenticeships in the 12 months to date have already been filled in that space. That's how you do it. And how you do it is you be open and honest with people and realise, by the way, that it's not just a question of saying to people, don't build that, come over and build our 40,000 homes. And what you've never done in Sinn Féin. And we tried to get some answers out of Deputy O'Brien before on this. When he says, I'll deliver 40,000 homes this year, how long is that going to take you, Owen? Where are they going to be built? Who is going to build them? And how are you going to pay for them? The difference between our policy and our plan is it's published, it's detailed with action points, and it's backed with real money.
Thank you, Minister.
€1.2 billion more than you, because I believe in home ownership, I believe in public housing, and the difference between this government and you is we're delivering it, and you just like to talk about it.
Thank you very much. Deputy Pauline Tully, please. Deputy Tully, sharing with Deputies Brown, Crowe and Clark.
Minister, there's a section of our population who just cannot afford to buy a home in Ireland today. This cohort, often called the squeezed middle, who themselves will say pay for everything and are entitled to nothing. But house prices continue to spiral upwards. I mean, the CSO Residential Property Price Index report for February 2022 shows that house prices across the state have risen by 13.5%. And the median new build house price for first-time buyers is now $335,000. I mean, that's not affordable for most people. And what's your response? A 5-year total target for local authority affordable housing delivery of 5,555 houses. It's dreadfully unambitious. I mean, an entire generation are locked out of home ownership, and this government are only funding local authorities to build 7,550 affordable houses between now and 2026. I mean, worse still is that they seem to think that there's no housing crisis in many parts of the country. My own constituency, for example, now one of these just over 7,500 affordable houses are to be delivered in either Cavan or Monaghan. Yet the daft.ie house price report of 2022 shows an 18.2% year-on-year average house price increase in Cavan from Q1 of last year to Q2 of 2022, and a 15.87% year-on-year increase in Monaghan for the same period. People simply cannot afford to get on the housing ladder. People who lost their home to relationship breakdown or mortgage repossession face an uncertain future in the private rental sector. Increasingly, though, the alternative option of renting is not possible for many people. The latest report from the Residential Tenancy Board indicates that rent increases for new tenancies grew by 9% statewide in the last 3 months of 2021. And once again, if I refer to my own constituency of Cavan Monaghan, rents increased by 6.6% and 15.5% respectively over the same period. And just the government are not doing enough. I mean, the affordable purchase targets are embarrassingly low. Only 18 counties are included in the targets. The rest, like Cavan Monaghan, will have zero delivery of local authority affordable housing. We need an average of at least 4,000 genuinely affordable houses for working people each year, and we need them built by each local authority. So please do something, Minister, to help the many, many people who cannot afford to buy their house. They cannot afford to rent. They're not eligible for HAP or RAS. They're not eligible for any sort of rent supplement. And they're forced to live with parents. I mean, it's disgraceful in this day and age. Thank you.
Brown.
The amount of people who are either locked out of home ownership or even locked out of rental accommodation is genuinely staggering. If we leave out the statistics for a minute, every deputy here will know from the calls they get to their office that there is a fundamental problem in the availability of accommodation. No family type is immune to this, whether they are families with young children, single parents with limited means, or single people. We have heard saddening, horrific stories from them all and have tried to assist them in a housing market that is out of their reach, whether that is to rent or to purchase. It is awful to see people in this situation, and it is appalling to know that the options to help them are extremely limited. When faced with a situation like this, It's common sense to devise a plan that tackles the housing crisis from every angle, whether that is from a rental point of view or from a purchasing perspective. But this government doesn't think that. That is apparent from the affordable housing targets up to 2016. And Minister, you talk, and you have a cheek to talk about narratives and the truth. You have failed, just like other TDs on that side of the floor that have been housing ministers. According to DAFT.IE's latest house price report, average listing price in Tipperary increased year on year by 14.3%. These price hikes contribute to local authority housing lists, which are creaking at the seams. At the same time, families are in hostels or sleeping on floors or sofas at their homes of friends or families. Yet outrageously, Tipperary doesn't even feature in the government's ambitious affordable housing targets up to 2026. This at a time when not only in our local authority unable to provide accommodation for those on our lengthy housing list, they are also struggling and are sometimes unable to provide emergency accommodation for those in need. Thousands of euros is being spent weekly on getting emergency accommodation in B&Bs and hotels instead of providing councils with the capacity which I'm calling for. Yet the government would prefer this than to allow local authorities like Tipperary County Council access to Affordable Housing Fund. We are calling for all local authorities to be allowed access to the Affordable Housing Fund and to stop this practice of exclusion that destroys lives and severely affects families. These unambitious affordable purchase home targets must be revised to deliver on average at least 4,000 affordable purchase houses a year from 2022 to 2026. The government must also stop contributing to the rising housing costs by scrapping the Help to Buy scheme and shared equity loan schemes, which push up prices and divert the funding into delivery of genuinely affordable houses. And last, the three parties must learn that giving massive handouts to big developers to deliver overpriced houses never works, because struggling home buyers and the taxpayer will always be the big losers in this situation.
Deputy Crowe.
I stood here almost 2 years ago during a Sinn Féin motion on the need to respect the demands of Irish people, to do something, anything to mend the utterly broken system that's the Irish housing market. Housing was one of the biggest issues of the 2020 election, and delivery of affordable housing was something that the new government made a lot of noise about it. 2 years later, we're asking here tonight, where are the promised housing? The government's affordable housing targets lack ambition, as many of the contributors have said here tonight. And the poor delivery is not the fault of councils or councillors, but of a government that could not deliver an affordable, workable, affordable scheme. Minister, affordable is not affordable in many areas, as you know. We need at least 4,000 affordable homes a year, and not the 7,000 every 5 years in the current plan. South Dublin County Council, which is my own area, will only see roughly 230 affordable homes a year. Schemes in Killinarden, Clonburris and Rathcoole had over 3,000 expressions of interest. In one area, 297 couples wanted to be considered for 16 houses. That was just in one estate. So the demand is there, Minister, but we're not meeting that demand. Affordable housing would serve to normalise the housing market, take people out of the rental market and bring houses down for everyone. Many just can't afford to buy, can't afford to rent. So what are they to do? There's no way that the majority of young people in my area could afford to buy a home. So if you're paying obscene rents, the rising cost of living, average incomes are not enough. If you're lucky to get a deposit, you then have to get in ahead of the investment firm with their unlimited funds who can outbid anyone. So 2 years later, from this government, we need a massive housing buildings programme on public land and a scheme that delivers affordable housing to people that need them. Handouts to big developers who deliver overpriced homes will do nothing for the struggling home buyers or hard-pressed taxpayers. We need a change, Minister.
Thank you very much, Deputy Clerk.
Minister, the extent of your affordable housing plans in Longford Westmeath have been laid bare, and for anybody needing a local authority delivered home, they are soul destroying. Yesterday was the first time I have ever seen a parliamentary question reply discussed in such detail in a local shop, and the commentary was absolutely damning, when not one single affordable home for Longford was included in that response to Deputy O'Brien. None. Zero. Now, last September, I read into the record of this House the local media coverage of affordable housing, when the Director of Services expressed his fears as correspondence received by his department returned not very encouraging insights as to where Longford fits in the government's plan. It's now crystal clear where Longford sits. It's in black and white. It sits nowhere for local authority delivered affordable homes. I would like to know, Minister, what exactly has been done to right this inherent wrong. Have you received the housing needs and demand analysis from Longford County Council as discussed recently at committee? And what actual engagement has there been to ensure that the county of Longford is not excluded? And what was the true purpose of that much lauded backbencher, I must say, letter to your department? From 22 to 26, your so-called affordable housing targets, local authority delivered for Westmeath, is 76. 15 houses on average annually. I have literally had more constituents with notices to quit in a day in my Westmeath offices. What my constituents of Longford Westmeath need is a dramatic increase in direct capital investment to local authority, genuinely affordable homes to buy. The CSO price index shows an 11% increase in Longford, 9.2% increase in Westmeath on the median price of a home. Despite your rhetoric about believing in home ownership, rhetoric does not build properties. Investment does, and investment in local authorities is what will meet the need of affordable housing.
Thank you, Deputy.
Can I just finish with this, Cian Corley? We seem to have ever-changing and very contradictory interpretations of what the word lease means coming from government. After all, we've listened to the Taoiseach telling us that leasing the National Maternity Hospital is the equivalent of owning.
Deputy. Deputy Jed Nash, please.
Cian Corley, I absolutely agree with Deputy Clerk's analysis and assessment, and unfortunately it's an all too common description that she's outlining to the House here this evening. Now, I don't always find myself in full agreement with every single sentence of every Sinn Féin motion or bill that's presented to this House. We do have our differences, and that's the cut and thrust of politics, and that's to be expected. But I find myself agreeing with absolutely every sentence, every utterance in the motion before us here this evening, and I do so without any hesitation at all. In any progressive society and successful economy worth the name, the aspiration to one day own your own home should be within the reach of most, if not all, working people. And Minister, I know that you agree with that sentiment and that ambition. Now, but we've been saying for some time now, for a considerable number of years, that nowhere is the social contract more broken, more fractured than in respect of housing supply. And when we talk about housing supply, we know that the trick is to get diversity of that supply right. And that means a mix of public homes, affordable homes and private homes built to last through the life cycle in a community reflecting that rich diversity in every community. Now, regrettably, the approach taken by the last government and continued by this one, with some small changes, is all wrong. Now, whether it relates to public housing, cost rental or the building of affordable homes, the excessive reliance on private developers to deliver the stock we need, is the absolute Achilles heel of this government's housing project. Now, as the Sinn Féin motion notes, both Housing for All and the government's proposals for affordable housing more generally lack ambition with regard to the provision of the required amount of housing on an annual basis. And I absolutely agree with that assessment. This is even more stark when you look at the specific proposals for provision of affordable purchase homes and cost rental. Now, at the time of the launch of Housing for All, commentators like the SRI suggested that up to 50,000 homes a year may be needed to be delivered on an annual basis to meet the requirements of our growing population. But since then, as you know, Minister, you've said it yourself, the challenge has become even deeper in the context of the crisis in terms of Ukraine and the responsibilities that this state has in welcoming refugees fleeing from their war-torn country. Now, we, the state, need to have greater ambition with respect to the provision of housing and how much is required every year, but even more so with respect to the delivery of affordable housing and all that that entails. Now, up to 2030, there will be 18,000 cost rental units, but that's an average of only 2,000 apartments and homes that will be delivered through that stream each year. Now, the commitment to 10,000 social homes a year is simply not enough. We all know that, given the demands that we face. Now, as I stated earlier on in my contribution, the government continues to rely excessively on the private sector, both for the delivery of housing generally and to supply affordable housing more specifically. Now, we believe that the state should be providing, at minimum, 20,000 homes a year, which requires a much more direct and hands-on role in the housing system than you are currently prepared to take. Now, I'm very concerned by the government's repeated focus on the incentivisation of investors in the private sector, especially in the build-to-rent sector, which will simply not deliver sustainable communities or secure housing. Now, this is back in focus again in light of recent reports that you're considering providing incentives of over €100,000 to developers to build apartments. Now, we have to stop doling out cash to incentivise development rather than recognising that to resolve the housing crisis, what's required is direct state delivery at a much higher level and a more intensive rate. Now, in addition, Minister, we must give local authorities the funding they need to build homes. The data shows that expenditure is down 53% from last year, and we need answers as to why the state is not properly funding direct build projects and instead is proposing yet another set of grants for developers. The delivery of homes rather than profits must be the priority, and we are at odds with you over how best that ought to be done. Now, the question, and really what this motion is about this evening, is about affordability and the affordability of homes. And the question of what constitutes affordability is another question that divides us and divides this House. In our view, the government needs to put a clear definition of affordability on a statutory footing. My colleague Senator Rebecca Moynihan has been saying that for a long time, and that definition should approach affordability from the perspective of an ordinary person seeking a roof over their head rather than simply at market discount. Now, the motion rightly points, for example, to affordability at O'Deveny Gardens in terms of full price being considered to be €400,000. Now, that's 4 times the salary of a TD, and I say that for context and for illustrative purposes. Affordability must be defined by the income of one individual rather than predicated on the idea that everyone buying a home is doing so within a traditional family unit, if I can describe it as such, or a couple. Family and household formation, as we all know, is very diverse these days. It comes in many, many forms, and that is as it should be. More than 400,000 people in Ireland currently live alone, and single people shouldn't be locked out of the market simply because of their family status and how they decide to live their lives. Housing for All still doesn't deliver enough state-led, social and affordable housing, and Labour wants this increased to 20,000 homes per year to address existing need and unmet demand. And we believe, as we had said in our alternative budget costed proposals last October, we believe we should build a further 2,000 social homes in 2022, in addition to the targeted 10,000 under all delivery streams that are funded for next year under the National Development Plan. And the Government is also proposing a further 2,100 affordable homes this year. And we believe that it should also be the case that a fund should be established to provide increased levels of affordable housing over 5 years, starting with €5 billion from the Ireland Strategic Investment Fund and €500 million of annual seed capital. Now, this would make good social and economic sense. It would make economic sense from an investment point of view for the taxpayer over the longer term, and it will make our economy more successful into the future. Now, why do I say that? I say that because when we talk these days to the likes of the American Chamber of Commerce, IBEC and other employer bodies, they tell us now, from a competitiveness perspective, that they're no longer talking or concerned about issues like labour costs and other issues that they would routinely raise with politicians over the years. What they're talking about now in terms of our competitiveness challenge is the lack of affordable homes for skilled workers, the skilled workers on whom our economic success and our competitiveness in terms of foreign direct investment will depend. And that is a massive, massive challenge. So even if it is a case that ideologically we may have government members who may decide that, look, there's no function really for the state here. This should be decided by the market, and only the market should provide homes with some additional units provided by local authorities and so on. Even if you're, decided that that wasn't something you're interested in, if you're interested in the economy and the development of the economy, you would say then, well, we really need to crack this in the context of our future economic success. So it needs to be looked at through the economic lens as well. Many colleagues here this evening have mentioned the experience in their own constituencies in relation to the provision and supply of affordable and private homes to buy. House prices in my own constituency of Louth have risen by 8% in the first few months of 2022. This comes on top of a 12% rise seen a year ago, and the average price of a home in my home county is now $257,000. That's over 100% above the lowest point in the last recession, which is in the recent memory, as we all know, and we are still living with the consequences of that and the dysfunctionality of the housing market and the housing supply system more generally. And actually, when you look at those figures, it's actually much more pronounced in my own home area of Drogheda, given our proximity to Dublin. So those Louth averages don't tell the entire story. And shockingly, yesterday in the Independent, the figures speak for themselves. That story in the Irish Independent. We'll only see a tiny number of affordable purchase homes being built between now and 2026 under the government's targets. In Louth, for example, just 45 homes will be built on average every year in one of the fastest growing parts of the country. And there are so many people, as we know, leaving the capital to live in areas like Drogheda, and Laytown, Bettystown, within a half an hour to quarters of an hour on public transport or by car to the city centre. That is a derisory level of investment given the scale of the challenge. I'll conclude by this, Minister, and I think you especially will understand this. Take the advice of senior officials in the likes of the Department of Public Expenditure Reform and central bank officials and scrap the ridiculous Help to Buy scheme. It's a subsidy for developers. That's all it is. It's driving house prices up. It's a deadweight investment as well. It's bad public policy, and divert the money that's been allocated to that from the shared equity scheme directly to those who will build the affordable homes we need.
Thank you very much. Deputy Cian O'Callaghan.
And firstly, I want to thank Teachta Ó Broin for this motion, and the Social Democrats will be supporting it. And it's welcome the fact that this gives us an opportunity to discuss these issues around affordability and housing. And I firstly just want to respond to a couple of things that the Minister for Housing said. And it is worth saying, he talks about the need in terms of supply and the problems of people objecting to housing. And it is worth noting that the people who voted to dezone land earmarked specifically for social housing, with 100 social homes earmarked and planned for this land, people who voted to do that in South Dublin County Council were not, as far as I know, Green Party councillors or from People for Profit or Social Democrats or, for the most part, Independents or from Sinn Féin or Labour. The people who did that were Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael councillors who voted to dezone that land in the middle of a housing emergency and housing crisis that will deprive, if that decision is reversed, will deprive us of 100 social homes that are badly needed in South Dublin. And if the Minister for Housing is serious about his comments on this, he really should call on those councillors to reconsider their position. He should show some leadership on it. Secondly, I want to say, in terms of government ministers, and we saw this at the launch of Housing for All, and we heard it again in the Chamber today, the comments about home ownership, and I believe in home ownership. You can say that all you want, but the reality is, under this government, home ownership is in free fall. It's been collapsing since Fine Gael took office in 2011. The Parliamentary Budget Office, which is independent, they concluded recently that home ownership among adults of prime working age, 25 to 54, in Ireland has collapsed. And we know from analysis done by Mel Reynolds and Lorcan Sir that the number of new homes actually available for individuals to buy last year fell to its lowest level in several years, to less than 6,000, just 5,698 new homes available for individuals to buy across Ireland. And why is that happening? It's because more and more investment funds are buying up homes, more and more build to rent is dominating. An analysis done by Dublin City Council shows that 82% of planning permissions sought or obtained in 2020 went to build to rent planning permissions. So that's what's happening under this government. The last speaker, Count Corlett, said that the government was considering giving a gift of or a grant of €100,000 to developers. Unfortunately, that's not. There's no evidence that it's under consideration. They've published the details of this, and it's not €100,000. It's up to, in what the government have published, it's up to €120,000 per apartment, of effectively a gift of public money to developers. What is it with this government gifting public money and public resources to private interests? Why are you so keen on doing it? And why, in fact, will you not use that money to create better public services and to directly build more affordable and cost rental homes? For €120,000, you could buy out the sites for these apartments at probably about €30,000. You could actually buy the site, and then you could build it out as affordable or cost rental at much more affordable rates using low interest loans from the Housing Finance Agency, which are much more cost effective than private finance. So why aren't you doing that? In fact, it's not even €120,000 that is the cap on this. The document published by the government says that they may, in fact, while they have a ceiling of €120,000, this may in fact be exceeded by no more than 20% in certain cases. So actually we're looking at the government, the cap, the real cap being €144,000 potentially per developer. And then, are we going to be surprised if developers come back and say, oh, well, building costs have increased, and they end up looking for more? But the key issue in terms of this gifting of public money to developers is, who asked for this? Who asked for it? It wasn't the ESRI, it wasn't any independent commentators. And I'm quite sure we will find out when we get the detail that the people who asked for this are the developers and their lobbyists. In fact, you read the government document on this and how they define the viability gap. It reads like something straight out of what the developers and their lobbyists talk about. In fact, the viability gap wasn't an issue several years ago, but something that has been exploited quite considerably by developers and their lobbyists. I want to quote from a paper done by Richard Waldron, and he did this research when he interviewed policymakers, planners, politicians and lobbyists for the development industry. And he says, and I quote, "A complicit state has further liberalised the planning system, introducing an array of policies that are ever more facilitative of development interests." That's what he says. He goes on to say that the viability cap, and what is this viability cap? How is it defined? We're not told how it's defined by the government in what you've published. You haven't told us, does it include a 15%, at least a 15% profit margin for developers? Because that's how they define their viability gap. So is the government going to come clean and tell us, with your 120,000 up to 120,000, maybe up to 144,000 subsidy per apartment, will that include at least 15% profit margin for developers? Because that's how they define viability. And this, of course, is all resources that could be and should be getting put directly into affordable purchase homes and into cost rental, built on a not-for-profit basis, rather than in this developer-led way. I just want one more quote from Waldron, because this is I think, important. And this comes from a lobbyist, and this is a direct quote, and they're talking about how they've inputted into the planning process. And the lobbyist for developers said, and I quote, in terms of legislation, "I gave them all the headings, they wrote the first draft, I reviewed the first drafts, we described what we wanted in terms of the level of tax relief, we agreed a policy and then wrote up the law." That's what developers are telling researchers in terms of their influence, in terms of the planning, tax and other aspects of housing policy. In terms of this subsidy being given to developers, and we're being told that, incredibly, there's no affordability built into this. I don't think we should be giving a subsidy to developers at all, but if there is, surely there should be some sort of affordability criteria. There's none. It's defined as the homes are going to be sold at market values, but we're not told how the market values are going to be set exactly, and will the build-to-rent schemes and the investment funds which are pushing up the prices of apartments, are the market values going to be set against those? Because they're impossible values for most people to be able to afford. Incredibly, given this level of public money going into developers, there's no, despite the huge climate crisis we have, there's no sign of any carbon budgets, carbon limits or carbon ceilings in terms of these developments. Now, I don't need to tell you, Minister, that we are out of time in terms of the climate crisis, that nothing is more urgent than what we do in terms of addressing the climate crisis. And yet, your government is giving public subsidies to developers to build these houses with no affordability measures built in, these apartments, no affordability measures, no even a discount of full market prices, and incredibly no measures to ensure carbon ceilings or carbon budgets or limits in terms of the embodied carbon aspect of these developments. That makes no sense whatsoever for people who care about the environment, makes no sense whatsoever for people who are struggling to afford to buy homes. So can we see the government withdraw these outrageous proposals to gift public money to developers through these subsidies, and instead use this money to buy up dormant planning permissions, buy up the sites and build genuinely affordable homes to rent and to build? And we know that works, we know it's been done well in other countries, so why can it not be done here? Gurv Margaret.
Thank you, Deputy O'Callaghan. Deputy Paul Murphy, please.
Thanks very much, and thanks a lot, Sinn Féin, for bringing forward this motion. The housing crisis is a failure of the market, it's a failure of the state, and it's a failure of this and previous governments. And we see that failure absolutely everywhere when we come to deal with the housing crisis. Often when we have debates about the housing crisis, the government likes to say that those of us in the opposition, those of us on the left, are approaching this with an ideological viewpoint, very ideological. That's why we're giving out about money being given to developers and so on, and the government are the pragmatists. Certainly for people before profits case, we are ideological. We don't hide that. Our ideology is in our name. We put people before profit. We take a socialist approach to the housing crisis, which means people's right to a home should come before the right to developers to profit, bankers to profit, landlords to profit. But the government likes to deny that it has an ideology, when actually the government's own ideology is very clearly a major part of the problem. Because the government is absolutely committed, against all of the evidence of all of the actions that they've tried, they're absolutely committed that the way to solve the housing crisis is to incentivise private developers to build homes. And the idea that if you incentivise private developers enough, eventually somehow it'll work and the housing crisis will get resolved. Of course, that ideology has the very happy coincidence of also serving the material interests of the developers in this country, who are the ones receiving the public money. And I think, the points around bridging the construction viability gap and doling out huge amounts of public money to developers really proves and underlines that point. Like, the government already had the Help to Buy scheme, which was fundamentally a help to profit scheme for developers. It was about funneling money through the hands of first-time buyers into the hands of developers and increasing property prices in order to incentivise the developers to keep building. And that's, if you look at the origin of Help to Buy, that was explicit in terms of the lobbying from the Construction Industry Federation. But now, in a sense, they're like bypassing the middleman. Don't even bother putting money momentarily into the hands of the first-time buyer before it goes to the developer. Just give the money directly to the developer. Give the developer €120,000 per apartment to developer to bridge the construction viability gap, which the point was well made by Deputy O'Callaghan there, that will also include the profit for the developer. And to add insult to injury, forget about the 120,000 cap. When it comes to regional cities, we can go up to €144,000. The handout won't be used to lower the price of the apartments. It won't come with any conditions. It is merely a massive handout to the already very wealthy. It's nothing new for Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. When many of the same developers crashed the economy and then ended up in NAMA, they got salaries of close to €200,000 a year to continue to operate. These are the corporate welfare cheats who cheat us all. Instead of throwing more public money at them, we should use public money directly, state-led construction of genuinely affordable and social housing, providing quality employment, apprenticeships for workers and so on. Another example of this approach of incentivising the developers and using lots of public money to go and do it is the question of LEHAF. We've seen €200 million of public money spent on LEHAF, building roads and infrastructure for private developers to help them profit. Originally, the promise was that 40% of homes built on LEHAF-funded land would have to be affordable. Very quickly, the government backed away from that and said instead there would be some haircut, which was unstated, for properties on this site. In Cherrywood, we've seen massive amounts of funding spent, and yet we've still heard nothing about what level of affordable housing will be provided and how genuinely affordable they will actually be. And that gets to the core of the problem with the government's approach and the government's plan in terms of affordable housing. I mean, it's like Humpty Dumpty said that when I use a word, it means just what I choose it to mean, neither more nor less. And the government says affordable and just says this is affordable housing, even though by anyone's standards, any ordinary person's standards, it's simply not affordable. I mean, the idea that €450,000 is an affordable price for a house in Dublin. You can't just say it and slap the label affordable on it and all of a sudden people can afford it. They still can't afford it no matter what you call it. And the whole problem, again, comes back to the ideology of the market, because how does the government determine affordability? Affordability is simply a percentage of market value. You just have a knockdown, 10 or 20% reduction for market value. And when market value is so completely out of control, completely unattainable for ordinary middle-income earners, well then a small reduction from that still leaves it absolutely unaffordable. Affordability should be defined in the language of ordinary people, that is actually something that ordinary workers could afford. We should stop pinning affordability to the market and instead connect affordability to average incomes. No worker should have to pay more than 25% of their income for a roof over their heads. I'd also make the point that where you have affordable housing and the state is putting in public money to develop affordable housing, which we support, we have to make sure that those homes don't end up in the hands of vultures or landlords, corporate landlords later down the line. We know there are corporate investors looking to profit from the state spending on housing. That's why we argue that all affordable housing purchase schemes must include strong clauses to ensure the unit can only be sold back to the local authority so that it remains affordable through generations, and that in effect it's another kind of model of public housing. In terms of the numbers being built, we've obviously seen the figures and they are pitiful. Less than 50 affordable homes a year in some of the key commuter towns around Dublin. 8 per year in Carlow and Laois. It's window dressing from the government. It's fiddling while Rome burns. It's what Dr. Rory Ahern has described these figures as pathetic, and he's completely correct. It seems that only 16 homes have been built under the current local authority affordable purchase scheme. For those 16 homes, over 300 families have applied. It shows, the gap between the crisis and the government's actions summed up in one figure. And fundamentally, what it all comes down to is the continued reliance on the market, on catering for the developers' needs, not on what people need. And so Minister O'Brien's plan is failing, will continue to fail, because it doesn't address the core issues behind the crisis, the over-reliance on the market to deliver a basic necessity, and the acceptance and the driving further of the commodification of an essential need for people. Our housing policy is built on a fundamental fallacy, an ideological fallacy, that if you incentivise developers, builders and financiers enough, eventually they will deliver what people need. The Dáil has changed laws to encourage corporate landlords into the system. We've abandoned any attempt to control or limit evictions. The government has eulogised private property rights over the right for housing. We have the Construction Industry Federation, who seem to have the ear of every housing minister and have the minister on speed dial, where they literally take their proposals and put them into law. We've changed the law, changed the building regulation, changed the spec of apartments, even decided to fund and grant access to finance based on whatever these vested interests want. Whatever they want, we have to bend over backwards for them in the hope that ultimately it will deliver. We have the utterly farcical situation where we put the corporate lobbyists in the form of the CIF in charge of keeping a register to ensure proper standards in the building industry. So enmeshed is our housing and urban planning policy with the needs of those vested interests that the government seems to get confused. It was once said that what's good for General Motors is good for the USA. Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael seem to believe what's good for the CIF, what's good for the corporate landlords, what's good for the developers is good for ordinary people in Ireland. The truth is, it's not. The truth is they have diametrically opposed class interests. They benefit when the prices go up, ordinary people suffer. Every failed target, every jump in homeless figures, every eviction, every hike in rents proves that what's good for the vested interests is most definitely not good for ordinary people in this country. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much, Concordia. And I welcome the opportunity to speak on this very important motion here this evening. I think it's important that we just reflect on what's happening right now. We have people in every constituency, and every TD has been talking about their constituencies and what's going on in it. And in mine, in Galway East, it's the same thing. We have people who cannot get a house to rent. We have people who want to buy a house and can't find a house to buy. We also have the situation where social housing list is growing and we have so much pressure. The HAP as a housing assistance payment is not working. It's not working the way it should work, in that people who have houses to rent are not willing to participate now in HAP anymore, because there are too many risks involved with that. So we have to look at all of that and say, well, how are we going to push forward, and how are we going to build ourselves out of this crisis? And I think that's what we have to focus on. I think the affordable housing scheme and the numbers that were announced yesterday are very disappointing. Like 75 houses for Galway County is not a huge amount of houses in the second biggest county in Ireland, geographically. And when you take it that you look at the multiplying factors across every county and you say it is a scheme that has been started. It's been called an affordable scheme, but it's going to take a hell of a long time to get it to a stage where it will actually be effective and be working. And I say this, that this is repeating things I've said here before in relation to opportunities that we have. Minister, why not make existing derelict houses in our towns and villages affordable for people to go in and build and occupy and live in? The Minister for Finance is in disagreement with me over extending the Help to Buy scheme to these properties. So I say fine if he doesn't want to do that. The government need to take strong, effective action to make these properties available so that people can actually go in, do them up, let them become livable spaces in our towns and villages. So I think that's very important, Minister, that we tackle that rather than saying, no, we cannot do this and we cannot do that. There's 45,000 of these houses in the West and North West Regional Assembly area. And a survey has been done by the Regional Assembly. The figures are there. Really and truly what we need to do is now take action on that. The other thing that the government announced was a 50 million fund to improve the wastewater needs in rural towns and villages in Ireland. A 50 million scheme that the local authorities can apply for funding for. There are so many of our towns and villages who do not have any wastewater treatment plant and are locked out of the planning system and the construction system because they cannot apply for planning permission on the basis that they will not be granted it. And even if they were granted it, it would be appealed to on Board Planola on the basis that any type of development here would be premature. We have towns around Galway like Abernathy, we have Corrafin, we have Craughwell, to mention three, where right now we could be building houses if we had a municipal treatment plant. Affordable houses, sites are available, and get on with it. They are within easy distance of community of connection to Galway City for work or to Athlone or whatever, just off the motorway. But basically, we're not doing that. 50 million is a pathetic amount of money to put into that. And if that's what it's for, it needs to be probably 10 times that if we're to tackle this problem. The other thing I would say is that what we're doing in Galway now, and this is something that's being developed, Minister, and it might shock you, coming from the Green Party, is that we are now talking about putting in clusters of houses. We would allow people to build 5 houses in a cluster and put in 5 individual septic tanks into our towns and villages. I don't think that's environmentally sustainable. And that's what we're actually doing, because we're not getting the money to do the municipal treatment plants in these towns. So I think we need to just take it for what it is. We need to make sure that this problem is actually sorted out once and for all. We have so much opportunity, but we seem to get caught up in schemes and talking about how we're going to develop them. And I know that the local authority in Galway County Council are working hard to deliver housing, and they are delivering some housing, but they need a hell of a lot more support, resources to do it, management to do it, and also the funding and the infrastructure to do it as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. There was a poll published the other day, Minister, by Ireland Thinks in association with the Sunday Independent, which asked people which of the following 2 issues should be the most important priorities to deal with. There was a long list of answers, but leading the way by far as the most popular 2 responses were the cost of living and housing. Instead of really getting to grips with them, the government are wasting energy pursuing a climate change agenda at a rate of knots, with little regard for the costs, to appease a party that is now languishing at 3% in the opinion polls. There is no significant demand for the government's climate policies at this emergency pace, but there is significant demand for the housing issue to be sorted out, but it seems only at a snail's pace. To be fair, not all of the problems associated with housing can be blamed on the government, but the government must ensure that it is controlling the controllables. We in this House are legislators. We make rules and regulations which govern people's behaviour in Ireland. So I don't expect the government to be able to solve problems with global supply chains, for example, but I do expect the government to ensure that the conditions are suitable in Ireland to allow a thriving building sector and stimulate the construction of housing. All of those rules and regulations governing the sector are choices made by government. The consequences of these choices have been stark for the people looking to get a house of their own. Over the last 10 years, successive governments have consistently placed barriers in the way of houses being built, and these barriers have all contributed to the current problematic housing situation. Barriers have been placed in the way of builders who want to build the houses and in the way of the people who want to buy the houses. I'm getting fed up of pointing out that the problem of housing being unaffordable will not be improved unless something is done to enable the average builder to build a house with less state-imposed cost barriers in their way. The state-imposed cost barriers include things such as state bodies like on Board Planola, the Office of the Planning Regulator, advising on minimum densities being imputed into county development plans that don't exist in law, and more often than not resulting in judicial review being taken when minimum densities are stipulated as part of the grant of planning. Minimum densities are often the reason developments don't go ahead. Unnecessarily onerous and costly conditions to be met before permission is given for developments, and then dezoning of lands, all serve to reduce the amount of houses being built. The social contract is broken for people in their 20s, 30s, and I'd say now more often in their 40s. People working as a Garda, or as a nurse, or as a teacher, or any of those traditionally regarded as good, steady government jobs cannot afford to buy a home. Over the last 10 to 15 years, government departments have also made it more difficult for certain employees to be considered permanent, again harming their chances of qualifying for a mortgage. And I know of a couple in their mid to late 20s in County Wexford who have a combined gross income of approximately €85,000 per annum and have combined savings of almost 3 times the required deposit. Yet they cannot qualify for a mortgage due to the nature of their employment contracts. Both of these people have displayed an ability to manage money, are debt-free, work hard, are well-educated, and for all intents and purposes are a safe bet for a mortgage point of view. Yet government-imposed rules mean that 2 people cannot get on the housing ladder. Living with parents is the best possible scenario for thousands of people in situations like this, and for many it's extortionate rents or homelessness. We need to examine where the social contract fell apart and start repairing it. Forcing a building contractor to build a certain amount of affordable homes in their development will not solve that problem. A first-time buyer has enough on his or her plate without their local county council competing with them to buy a house, thus also driving up the price in the process. If this government is really committed to ensuring affordable houses are built, then it's time the government looked at their tax take on the new homes. Government could take less than the current 13% VAT rate. You could follow in the steps of our neighbours in the UK and in the North. If you're serious about providing affordable homes, that is, and reduce your tax take to 0, because there's no reason why you can't. Affordability is what a potential buyer can afford to pay for a house. Given the constraints imposed by the central bank's mortgage lending rules, reducing VAT to 0 is the only measure that will put a new home in reach of my couple in Wexford earning €85,000. Thank you.
Thanks, Deputy Murphy. The next speakers are Deputies Michael Collins, Richard Donoghue, Matty McGrath and Carol Nolan, each 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I'm back again, Minister, this week repeating the same thing over and over inside here in the Dáil. Last week I spoke about the family in Clonakilties whose rent had gone up 25% as did their neighbours. I spoke about the man who was sleeping in his car. I spoke about in West Cork. I spoke about the amount of constituents who are constantly calling into my clinics trying to find housing, trying to make a home for themselves. We have the young married couples, both with fairly good jobs. They can't get a mortgage, Minister. There's something wrong. They can't even find a house to buy, even if they could get a mortgage. We really do need to look outside the box here, Minister. I know of people who live in log cabins and are happy to do so for a few years of their life, but they are scared that the planning authority will come knocking on the door someday and kick them out. Why not look at the idea of people living in containers? I've actually seen it. It's quite a nice setup in many places, but again, they're afraid that the planning authority come knocking on the door, and in some cases it has happened in West Cork. They've had to pull them down. 2 containers up on each other, beautiful living accommodation, gone. And the person out the street, basically. So again today I'll bring up, obviously I'll bring up about planning permission in West Cork. It's such a difficulty for so many young people. You know, I don't know what a percentage of, just told to me in my office there recently, we have a huge amount of people coming to me looking for planning, really genuine applicants, young people trying to get off the ground, Minister. And they've been refused because of the most silliest reasons that could ever be known. And some people just have a sight got from their mum, their dad or whatever, and it's one break they get, and then their opportunities to obviously go out there and build that home for themselves, that dream home, and they can't. That's broken from them. They're back into the social, the housing system again, looking for a house from the state. That's not what they wanted. They wanted to go on their own. Rural Ireland, you know, there's a lot of houses in rural Ireland, especially in small towns and villages that are lying in ruins. And the side of villages, no slates, no roofs on the houses. That's an area that needs to be looked at. Rural Ireland is actually can create major solutions for a lot of problems that are out there in housing today, but it's never been looked at. So, you know, it's a sad reflection. And then we have post offices and various important resources in that town or village dying and closing because of that. Sewage is a major issue down in West Cork. A lot of sewage systems have never been done. Castletown's in, Goleen, I could name out a good few. And I also I've only 8 seconds left, I want to talk about the County Development Plan, which I won't have time to know, but that's scandalous the way a lot of places are being cut off and being zoned, areas that needed zoning. Thank you, Minister.
Minister, I met you in Kilmallock recently, and I welcomed you to County Limerick. 1,400 affordable houses will be delivered by the state this year. 1,000 of those will be in Dublin, and 256 homes will be built in the other 4 cities. The delivery target for Limerick local authority is 264 houses to be built between now and 2026. That's local authority houses. 53 of those were built this year in Limerick. I'm working with a village in County Limerick which is planning for 70 houses. And some of them are pre-sold. So what's the problem, Minister? I'll tell you what the problem is. I can deliver 70 houses in County Limerick, but there's no water. They're waiting for another 12 months for water to come to Croom and County Limerick. So I can deliver 70, the local authority can deliver 56. And I'm only talking about one town in County Limerick. This again goes back to the infrastructure, which I've said to you on many a time, and many government, infrastructure. What does infrastructure mean for County Limerick and all the other counties? It means we can get more houses built, means that we can be more sustainable, means that we can have businesses that are sustainable, and we can have people return home to where their other families are. So people can return home. So it's been the failure of this government and previous governments that there's no infrastructure in County Limerick and around Ireland. So if you look, excuse me, sorry, Minister, I'd like your attention, please, and if you wouldn't mind making your time, Mr. Bruton, thank you. I would ask people to look at County Limerick. We have people that want to build houses. The local authority can't supply them, the government can't supply them, so they want to build houses on their own land. Planning permission is stopping them from building them, and if they are allowed to build, they are charged so much a square foot for building a house on their own lands, supplying their own water, supplying their own sewerage, which is nothing for the government, but the government take about 7,000 on fees off them. For local footpaths, which there's none, local lighting, which there's none. These are people are building in rural Ireland, which are not asking the state to build a house, they're saying they'll build their own house. On that then, we have 23% VAT on inflated costs. That means that your VAT intake on materials in houses in Ireland is up by 80%. 13.5% VAT, Minister, as well on building costs. I'm sorry about that, but
I too want to compliment the movers of the motion here tonight. And Minister, I know you're new and can't blame you for all the ills, but we're punishing farmers and we're punishing people. We saw the Glanbia plant in Kilkenny and the objections on Tashka, when the single biggest polluter in this country are local authorities. Right up from Mizenhead to Donegal, down to West Cork, everywhere. I could name 25 villages in Tipperary waiting for sewerage infrastructure, belching raw sewage into streams and rivers. EPA come out and they go above the plant and take the samples. It's a disgrace, and you're penalising people then. People want to build houses then, and they build them and their own land. No, you can't get planned. Umpteen conditions on top of it. And Deputy Murphy is right about the Office of the Planning Regulator. We never had him before, and we managed fine without him. So why do we need him to be interfering in densities and whatever anything else in the middle of a housing crisis? When we want to build houses and people want to build houses, cut the taxes, cut the VAT. I think somewhere near 40% or 45% the government take back of the people who are trying to build. The explosion in the costs. Most small builders now won't build a house, won't quote you for a house because they can't afford it. So the merry-go-round goes on and they're not being delivered. Full stop. And I have my offices inundated with people being noticed to quit, and with people, landlords taking back the houses to sell them, and it's unbelievable. There's only a number, only 5 or 6 properties available in the whole of County Tipperary. It's a nightmare for people. I was talking to a priest today about a family who are living in a room. A child this morning had to eat. This isn't a village in County Tipperary. He had to eat the cornflakes off his bed and in a bowl on the side of his bed. No cooking facilities. Go down in the streets. They have a fridge, all right, and that's all they have. So, I mean, we need to change the way we do things. And instead of that, your government totally out of touch. Pile on more. Talk to the Construction Industry Federation. Give them grants to build houses in Dublin. It's not working. We need radical change. We need a huge sea change, and we must get it. And, Minister, I don't see any possibility with the amount of red tape and bureaucracy. It's crazy.
Minister, this young generation of Irish people are being failed by government. They're being failed with the lack of affordable housing and also barriers constantly in terms of planning permission, where they try to build houses on their own land and they're impeded. It's very, very unfair. It's a no-win situation for young people, particularly young people. I just want to stress that. And I think we do need to see change. And we also need to question, Minister, my point here today really is to draw your attention to the fact that we have approved housing bodies. And I've raised issues in regard to these approved affordable housing bodies, I should say. And during an oral priority question I had with the Minister of State, Peter Burke, recently, he revealed to me that government had invested €500 million in the AHB sector last year alone. I also know from another PQ reply that currently there are 495 approved housing bodies listed in the Department's register. Now, I think questions need to be asked. If there's 495 approved housing bodies and we still have a housing emergency that is getting progressively worse, I think it's high time questions be asked. You know, we have to do this, I feel, in order to move forward. And I do wonder if it's becoming like the bloated NGO sector, where we have 30,000 NGOs funded to the tune of 5.2 billion. Lots of duplication. There's money being wasted, taxpayers' money thrown around like confetti. It's not good enough, needs to be called out. Where is the value for money? I understand that a new strengthened regulatory regime for the approved housing bodies has been put in place, and that approved housing bodies regulatory authority will seek to encourage and facilitate better governance, administration and management, including corporate governance and financial management of this sector. Will the Minister clarify when he expects the AHBRA to make its first report? Something is very wrong here, Minister, something very serious, and I'm not convinced that we need more approved housing bodies to remedy the problems that exist. It's not working, clearly not working. In Laois and Offaly, we only have a handful of individual houses delivered, a handful, when we need huge schemes delivered. And also I want to point out to you that the housing body Respond received €245 million from 2016 to 2021, and it's unable to replace the windows and doors in a small estate with 26 houses and apartments. The windows and doors are 20 years old or more. Now, there's much talk about energy efficiency, and yet we're seeing people being failed. They haven't replaced them. Where is all this money going? And could we please put the money where our mouths are? Government policy, energy efficiency. What's going on here? Can the approved housing body Respond not be called out to replace these windows and doors in Chesterfield Estate in Bork, County Offaly?
Thank you. Next deputy is Deputy Thomas Pringle. 10 minutes.
I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to speak on this very important issue tonight. I strongly support Sinn Féin's motion, and I thank them for bringing forward the issue of affordable housing today. Last week I spoke of the many people in this country who have been unable to secure rent, and you would be right to wonder why so many have come to depend so heavily on the rental sector. The main reason that a growing section of people have been forced into renting is because they have been completely locked out of home ownership. You now have a situation in this country where most people no longer have the option to buy, but struggle to find and afford rent. I have come across more people stuck in the middle of this impossible dilemma than I care to count. There is a general feeling of hopelessness among my constituents and across the entire country, because things only seem to be getting worse, and sadly they are not wrong. House prices are spiralling out of control, and the market is showing no signs of slowing up. In my constituency of Donegal, the average house price jumped by €5,000 in the first 3 months of this year, and in the 3 months previous to that, they had risen by an average of €6,000. This represents a year-on-year increase of €25,000 in total. The continued rise in prices has occurred across the entire housing market and has even occurred among older houses that would require a lot of work, despite the continuously increasing cost of construction and renovation these days. At the end of the fourth quarter last year, there were 269 properties for sale in Donegal, which was a decrease of 10.3% over the quarter. There is no doubt that demand has far outstripped supply, particularly in Letterkenny, as LYIT attains technological university status. There is also a demand and supply among areas affected by mica. One estate agent in Milford has said that the ongoing situation with defective blocks has hampered market activity for the more recently constructed properties, as continued uncertainty plagues the redress scheme. I brought this up earlier today with the Taoiseach and was very disappointed with his response. These families are faced with agonising uncertainty day after day, and they are promised that legislation would be published at the start of this year. We are now in May and we have seen no movement on this. And indeed, they were promised that it would be published at Easter as well, and that didn't come either. So what's more is that we are now being told that the legislation will not undergo pre-legislative scrutiny. This is totally unacceptable, Minister. It is essential that important legislation like this is scrutinised properly. And you cannot use the line of wanting to get legislation through quickly as an excuse not to engage in pre-legislative scrutiny. This should have been prioritised. MICA has been an issue for a long time. Pre-legislative scrutiny should have been completed before the new year, with the aim to publish the legislation at the start of 2022. There is no reason why this couldn't have been done, except for the lack of government will. Every month this legislation is delayed is another month of uncertainty for MICA families and for the housing market in Donegal. To have to endure the MICA crisis is bad enough, but having to endure the crisis on top of this, the housing crisis on top of this, is devastating for these families. I hope that government remembers this as they continue to delay this legislation and as they decide to exclude very important voices to the scrutiny of the process of this legislation. Because the MICA Action Group would actually see through the legislation straight away and see if there's any problems in that. And maybe that's the reason why it's not going for pre-legislative scrutiny. The government tried to hoodwink the MICA Action Group people in December when they made an announcement at 8 o'clock in the morning. Within an hour, the MICA Action people had torn it apart and seen what was involved in it. And I'd be afraid that this is what's going to happen with this legislation as well. And I would also like to support this motion's call to scrap the Help to Buy scheme, as well as the First Home Affordable Purchase Shared Equity scheme. It has been shown that these schemes only serve to push up prices and divert funding from delivering affordable homes. We should instead be significantly increasing our direct investment of genuinely affordable homes through local authorities and approved housing bodies. This will be a real and effective measure to tackle the housing situation. However, it seems that this government has no real interest in tackling this matter. The Minister for Housing has not delivered on his promise to deliver affordable homes, and his government's housing policies not only do nothing to help struggling people, but have actually further contributed to the housing crisis through schemes such as these, which have just created further inflation. We have seen proof of this by the continued rise in prices and by the stock of homes for sale falling to historic lows of just 11,300 across the whole entire country, with the shortage of stock for sale or rental most acute in rural areas of the country. Analysis has also shown that house prices are now 7 times average incomes, and the Central Bank of Ireland and Economic and Social Research Institute estimates that the mortgage lending rules have actually stopped house prices rising by an additional 10 to 25% over and above the existing levels. This is not sustainable, and it cannot continue on this way. Our citizens are asking for help, and it's our job to do all in our power to help them. I am urging the Government to consider the proposals in this motion today. The amendments to this motion put forward by the Government are not good enough and are most certainly not ambitious enough. The Housing for All strategy is watery at best, and relying on this strategy to address the issues that are arising isn't good enough and will never do anybody any good. And even to emphasise that, I see in the Minister's answer to the motion, he quotes COVID-19 pandemic as being one of the big problems with the housing supply. I would say he's disappointed probably that he wasn't in the Department of Health, because he could have blamed the cyber attack as well. That would have been nothing. That's been a great benefit for everybody, and explaining for delays. It is time that we moved away from the failed housing policies of Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil, and it's high time this government started listening to their own constituents and people on the ground who have been saying time and time again, what you're doing isn't working. It is time for a change, and implementing the proposals in this motion will be a very positive step toward delivering that change, and that is what is needed at this stage. Thank you.
Before we move on to the government slots, Minister, there is an amendment proposed to the motion in the name of the Minister for Housing. Can I call on you to move the amendment? So we'll proceed now with the next speakers. It's Deputy Richard Bruton, Emer Higgins and Minister Noonan.
Well, thanks very much for the opportunity to speak on this debate. I know time is very limited. To be honest, when I see Sinn Féin come into this House criticising the government for not delivering affordable homes to buy, I take a very deep breath. They come as a wolf in sheep's clothing. The reality is that they oppose 5 important measures from government that will together deliver 50,000 homes at affordable prices to first-time buyers over the next 5 years. They are the Help to Buy scheme, which will deliver 32,000 at least, because that's what it's delivered over the last 4 years. The First Home Shared Equity scheme, that will deliver 8,000 homes to people at affordable prices. The support for first-time buyers in our cities to access multi-unit properties, which are very expensive for first-time buyers. That will deliver 5,000 homes, as I see from an announcement from the Minister today. And the Land Development Agency, through its Project Tusig and through its activities on state lands, will deliver a further 8,000 homes. They oppose all of these measures, and they total 50,000 homes that we will deliver over the coming years at affordable prices. Their view is extremely narrow. They insist on a narrow ideological approach that will only include, they will not have any private homes on public lands. That is a narrow approach that will condemn people not to get access to homes at affordable prices. It's housing apartheid policy, which Dublin does not need. We need integrated communities, which the government policy seeks to pursue. And I commend the government for creating a framework that is capable of delivering. We see 35,000 housing starts in the last 12 months, a very significant step forward. But I would say to you, Minister, there can be no room for complacency. I worry about the stalling of fixed-price contracts as a result of rising costs, and we need to address that. I worry about the vigour with which the Land Development Agency is bringing forward sites that can drive down site values, and I would urge you to continue to deliver as quickly as possible in those 2 areas.
I want to use my brief time to put on record my support for the Help to Buy scheme and my total dismay at the idea of abolishing it, and that's what's being put forward by the opposition here today. The Help to Buy scheme does exactly what it says on the tin. It helps people buy their first home, and it has been a welcome financial contribution for many families, 32,000 to be exact. Nearly €600 million has been paid out under the scheme to help people buy their first home. In Dublin alone, just last year, 1,127 people were assisted with Help to Buy. The figures prove it is helping people. And the very notion of abolishing a scheme which has provided 32,000 people and young couples with financial assistance towards buying their own home is just mad. And yet this is what Sinn Féin are suggesting, getting rid of a support scheme for first-time buyers. Prime example of opposition for opposition's sake. If anything, we should be expanding the Help to Buy, not abolishing it. And with regard to affordable housing targets, the government aims to provide 28,000 affordable homes by the end of 2026. And it's through multiple channels, not just the Affordable Housing Fund. This year, affordable and social housing delivery will be achieved through the allocation of €4 billion in capital and current investment. And over the next 3 years, there will have been €20 billion in state investment poured into housing. In 8 years' time, under Housing for All, there will be 90,000 extra social homes, 36,000 new affordable purchase homes, 18,000 new cost rental homes. And that is the difference between government and opposition. Government targets are real and their plans are costed. Strategy is multi-annual, it's multi-billion, and it's already in motion. It's already helping people. It's rooted in reality and it's backed up by financial packages. But the proposals we hear again and again from opposition are pie in the sky based on fairy tale economics.
issue that Deputy O'Callaghan raised around carbon budgets, and all developments now are covered by building regulations and energy standards. And Deputy Murphy, and we had two contributions, were saying we're giving too much to developers, and some saying we're not giving enough. The LIHAF scheme, I think, is really important in terms of front-loading infrastructure, and Deputy Murphy's, Verona Murphy made disgraceful comments in terms of wasting energy pursuing a climate agenda, but this is a reminder that this is about our common home as well. In closing then, I just want to acknowledge that the current highly visible reality of price inflation. New housing supply in Ireland, like much of the EU, has been impacted by periods of reduced construction activity, the COVID-19 crisis and global supply chain issues. The war in Ukraine has exacerbated inflationary pressures, with rising energy and material costs impacting many sectors, including construction. Ireland is not a unique case, but we are working to overcome these issues. Supply is the key issue, and supply is increasing, notwithstanding the challenges. The Central Bank's recent estimates of completions this year and next are in line with Housing for All targets. This trend will only accelerate in coming years. Positive figures for new homes completed and commenced, which are all higher than they have been for many years, indicate Housing for All is working. Over the past 4 quarters, 22,219 homes were delivered, 5,669 in the first quarter of this year, while 34,846 new homes were commenced in 12 months to March 22. In the meantime, policies are being implemented to assist those for whom affordability and home ownership is particularly challenging. As we have said before, this government believes that in home ownership we must use all tools at our disposal. The Affordable Housing Act, passed overwhelmingly by this House last year, laid foundations for a range of affordable housing schemes which, like cost rental and the Local Authority Affordable Purchase Scheme, are now either already in operation or, like the First Home Scheme, are very close to launch. With regard to recent reports which underrepresented our affordable housing targets in referring singularly to local authority-led affordable housing, I want to reconfirm that this government aims, through the multiple channels it has activated, to provide over 28,000 affordable homes by end of 2026. Looking at the full picture, affordable housing will be provided through a combination of over 7,500 homes provided directly across at least 18 local authority areas where affordable housing has been clearly determined. I stress that these targets are intended as a baseline figure for delivery that is led and arranged by local authorities. 8,000 homes under the First Home Affordable Purchase Shared Equity Scheme, which will be available nationwide in the period 2022 to 26. 7,800 affordable purchase and cost rental homes through the Land Development Agency delivered on state lands via Project Tussock. 1,500 affordable homes under Part 5 arrangements are targeted for delivery by local authorities. 4,000 cost rental homes to rent to be provided by approved housing bodies using the Cost Rental Equity Loan Facility. The Local Authority Home Loan and the Help to Buy scheme will also continue to help improve affordability for lower and middle income earners, allowing them to access home ownership in the way that otherwise they could not. This year, funding of €676 million has been made available specifically on affordability measures. A guaranteed €20 billion in state investment in housing will be made available to the end of 2025. The new National First Home Scheme to assist affordable purchases in the lower end of the price distribution of the private market is an example of the short-term limited intervention. It is carefully designed to mitigate inflationary risk while helping people to achieve the stability of home ownership over the next 4 years. With the state's €200 million investment doubled by strategic partnership with mortgage lenders, First Home is scheduled to be launched shortly. I must re-emphasise our strong commitment to the state in action through public channels. Locally affordable housing delivery is also being placed on a more strategic footing. Local authorities with a strong and identified affordable housing need were asked to prepare affordable housing delivery action plans. In doing so, they take into account the intended provision of affordable housing by the Land Development Agency and approved housing bodies, and assess the level of affordable demand in their area and arrange provision accordingly. Their plans are currently being finalised, and it is expected that they will be ready for publication in the coming months. The targets for each local authority are aligned with the level of need arising in those areas as determined by the Housing Need and Demand Assessment Tool, which was developed in cooperation with the SRI. Where local authorities such as Waterford, for example, have identified a demand and can secure delivery of a high number of affordable homes in their area, that Affordable Housing Fund supported delivery is welcome. For those local authorities without affordability targets, we are aware that localised affordability challenges can exist in key towns. Where this occurs, funding can be made available if needed to address those localised challenges. I am very happy to see that local authority deliver this year for the first time in well over a decade. The first such homes are being advertised and sold in County Cork, in Cork City, Fingal and South Dublin, and at significantly discounted prices, with more new homes to follow across the country later this year. A pipeline of delivery is being developed by local authorities, with 9 further schemes expected to go on site in 2022. Local authorities are also implementing the state's offering of long-term, low-cost mortgage credit, with the home loans being designed to be particularly accessible for single people and those eligible for Fresh Start principles. Overall, I am not discounting the very real challenges that ordinary people are facing. The outlook is more positive than might be presented. The Housing for All strategy is working, supply is increasing, and particular affordable schemes are being implemented to assist ordinary people into home ownership. It is in its motion, the Government reflects these realities and I hope makes clear its commitment to the core principle that everybody should have access to good quality housing to purchase or rent. We have progressed much already and there is a long way to go, and we are moving in the right direction. We'll
revert now to the Sinn Féin deputies Pa Daly and Morris Quinlivan, 2.5 minutes each. And Deputy O'Brien to close.
I see around the county of Kerry, from Tusist to Tarbert to Turin-Cahill and over to Countraw, the results, the problems and the fallout of government policy and previous government policy over the past 10 years. I see queues of 30 to 40 people seeking to rent a home. It's practically impossible to rent. Homelessness is on the increase. Vacant homes aren't being turned around fast enough. Compulsory purchase orders to get housing back into use is practically non-existent. People waiting on the housing list for 15 years. The decision to outsource social housing to the market 10 years ago, in tandem, I believe, with the abolition of the town councils of Tralee, Listowel and Killarney, was a disaster. I also see the lack of sewage treatment plants, wastewater treatment in places like Glenbeigh, Castle Gregory, Abbydorney, Feenet. You cannot build more than 2 houses together, or 2 houses together, even because of the lack of any water system. At the other end, people can't afford to purchase houses. It's hardly surprising when figures from the CSO tell us that house prices in Kerry rose, or in the South West region, rose 15.4%. In 2020, house prices in Kerry increased more there than in any other county. The DAF.ie report paints a similar picture, with prices in Kerry up 7.5% for a 1-bedroom apartment, 14.2% for a 2-bedroom terraced house, and 18.1% for a 3-bed semi-D. As a result, in 2021, house prices in Kenmare and Dingle were up 10%, Tralee up 15%, and in Killarney a staggering 18.5%. Government responses are overly reliant on a subsidy to developers, increasing inflation even before the current inflation crisis. The shared equity scheme, it should be abandoned. I know people who went into the last one, and after 20 years they still only own half their home. A builder recently presented me with a folder of price increases for builders providers, with near monthly increases across the board from providers. Both in housing, both financed and purchased, increasingly provided by private capital looking for a return, price increases are built into public and government policy. Ordinary people are struggling, especially those who availed of the PIPs and who sold their homes in negative equity. They can't avail of the Fresh Start scheme, which is only open to those who have availed of statutory insolvency schemes. Workers and families need proper solutions, and I encourage everyone to support the motion.
Minister, house prices are out of control and have been for some time now. The price of homes keeps going up while the available income for many families keeps going down due to inflation. Huge numbers of our people are being locked out of home ownership, and the efforts of the Minister for Housing to address this have been woeful. On a daily basis, my constituency office in Limerick receives calls of desperation from people who are being locked out of home ownership. These are people who struggle to save a deposit. They aren't fortunate enough to avail of a cash injection by their parents. They're trying to buy their own, to buy on their own home, and a lack of support to the government offering them is galling. Is it any wonder that the average income family or new couple struggle to get on the housing market? In Limerick, the average price of a house purchase has risen by 8.2% year on year. For young families, a 3-bedroom semi-detached house in Limerick will cost on average 10.3% more than it did this time last year, with the average price of such units starting at €212,000. In some of the most sought-after suburbs, the price of a 3-bedroom terrace is almost €250,000. The average income families are caught between a rock and a hard place. On one hand, they are locked out of purchasing their own home, but on the other, they earn too much to avail of council-supplied housing or support through a HAP scheme. The social housing income thresholds have not been changed since 2011. This is something that should be rectified, and the income cut-off levels need to be increased to reflect inflation. All the while house prices go up, according to DAFT.ie, we now have 7 consecutive quarters of house prices increasing. Coupled with that, we see the number of new homes available at their lowest level since January 27. Prices are going up, but supply is decreasing. This is happening on Minister O'Brien's watch. It is happening because government policies such as Help to Buy and shared equity inflate house prices. This should come as no shock to anybody. It has been forewarned that this would be the outcome. It is recognised that there is a lack of local authority affordable housing, yet the Minister seems to pick his delivery targets out of thin air. Using Limerick as an example, the local authority affordable housing delivery targets for 2022 to 2026 stands at 264 units, or 52 per year. Minister, there are over 2,203 people on the housing list in Limerick, with a further 344 awaiting a transfer, and your unambitious targets will have next to no impact on these housing figures. People are desperate now, Minister, across Limerick. We have generations of families living in the same home because rent is too high, purchase of social housing are all out of their reach. So solutions, Minister, you have to step up to the plate here. We need to revise the affordable purchase home targets. They are insufficient. Local authorities must be allowed to access affordable housing fund. Income thresholds for social housing support must be dramatically increased, and the failed shared equity loan and Help to Buy schemes need to be dumped.
Chair and Minister, I'd like to just put on the record my response to a number of factually incorrect claims that Minister O'Brien made during his contribution earlier. As always, it's a pity he doesn't remain to the end of the debate, but we're more than happy to have your presence here as usual. The first is Darragh O'Brien criticised the figures upon which this motion is based. He said in the parliamentary question that it also refers to possible affordable purchase homes to be delivered by the Land Development Agency and Part 5. The problem is the overwhelming majority of counties listed in the parliamentary question won't have any LDA homes because the Land Development Agency is precluded from being active in those areas. And in those local authority areas where the LDA is active, very, very few affordable purchase homes will be delivered until 2024, 2025. And even then, we don't know if they'll be genuinely affordable. So to say that somehow there's also this as yet unquantified number of affordable purchase homes by the LDA is simply not the case. Likewise, the Minister well knows that the changes to Part 5 of the Planning and Development Act only apply to land that's purchased this year. And therefore, if the land is purchased this year, it's unlikely there'll be a planning application until next year, which means those homes won't be delivered for 2 to 3 years after. So again, no affordable purchase homes are likely to be delivered during the lifetime of this government via the changes to Part 5 of the Planning and Development Act. It's also important to remember that a significant number of the homes that are listed in the parliamentary question reply won't be affordable at all, and O'Devlin Gardens, Oscar Traynor Road and the lands in Donabate are good examples where the all-in cost of the affordable home, the full price the hard-working family will have to pay, is in excess of €400,000 between the initial purchase price and the shared equity loan repayment. Hardly what I think either you or I, Minister, if we were being honest with each other, would call affordable. And then finally, the suggestion that the shared equity loan scheme delivers affordable housing is absolutely ludicrous, because in fact you can use that product to buy properties up to €400,000 to €500,000. They are not affordable homes, and the Minister knows that only too well. Minister O'Brien also criticised what he said was Sinn Féin's threadbare housing policy. Of course, he does this all the time. He waived a summary document that I had sent to him a number of years ago, which is based on extensive, not only policy propositions and documents, but draft circulars and year-on-year of alternative fully costed budgets. And again, I think it's very disingenuous of the Minister to do that. He also once again repeated the claim, and it is not true, that the government is investing €4 billion in public housing this year. It is not. Go and look at the budget book that the Minister for Finance announced in this chamber last October. The total direct capital investment by the state and local authorities and approved housing bodies is just under €1.5 billion, only €100 million more than the year before. Our proposal is to double direct capital investment by the state up to about €3 billion for the delivery of social and genuinely affordable homes. The Minister is right. We just discussed this last week. The completions are up and commencements are up, but completions are up only to meet this year's target of 24,000 homes. Nowhere close to the 40,000 homes that we need. And of those 24,000 homes that will be delivered, how many will be genuinely affordable? How many will be even for sale on the open market? Far, far too few. And likewise with commencements, because there's an increasing number of apartment developments, they'll take 2 to 3 years to complete. So this government could well be out of office before any of these things start to change. Probably the most disingenuous thing the Minister said, of course, was he criticised Sinn Féin's affordable housing proposal. And once again, he misrepresented it. So let me repeat. We have a very specific and innovative proposal for affordable purchase, which would ensure not only that the property is affordable to the first purchaser, but every subsequent purchaser. It's very simple. You buy the house is yours, you can do with it what you want, but we don't sell you the public land. And you are able to use that land for free indefinitely, as your children and grandchildren can be, so long as you don't rent it out to the private rental sector. And when you sell it to another affordable home purchaser into the future, index-linked for inflation and home improvements. That way we would build up tens of thousands of privately owned, privately owned and privately tradable, but permanently affordable homes. An eminently sensible idea. The problem is the government simply doesn't understand the depth of the crisis. They're not investing enough, and the targets from the Minister in the parliamentary question reply demonstrate that clearly, which is why I stand over this motion. I stand over the call to double capital investment to deliver 20,000 public homes a year, and in particular 4,000 genuinely affordable homes for working families year on year from now until 2026. Anything short of that isn't acceptable, and that's why we won't support the government's amendment. Thank you, Chair.